All right, welcome back to Farms and Frontlines, everybody. I am your host, Max Terzano, and I'm joined, as always, by Jess Rudo.
Hey, everybody.
We're excited to be back. We missed last week, but we've got a pretty entertaining episode this week. You'll never guess, but this week we're actually going to be talking about farms and frontlines.
What?
But on a more serious note, we're actually going to be talking about foreign ownership of farmland in the United States. Jess, this is a topic you brought up a while ago as something that would be kind of interesting to dig into, and we didn't at first, but as we've gotten further along, we've kind of dug a little bit deeper into it here and there, and it's actually a very interesting topic. How did you first come across this?
So I was really interested in this topic. I don't know if it's my algorithm that brings up China, often in my scrolling through news, but something that gets pushed a lot is the concern behind China buying all of this land within the United States. And it made me question, is that legal to do? Is that legal for a foreign government to buy land in the United States? It seemed counterintuitive.
You really think about, especially China.
Yeah, you would think that'd be something, but then, in my history brain, it made me go back to the Chinese Exclusion Act. So I was like, but it's the government.
Isn't that just crazy? Like how far things have come?
Yeah.
Whereas the Chinese Exclusion Act, literally, you can't come here to, buy up millions of acres of farmland.
Right. Yeah. So I kind of sent us down this rabbit hole of foreign ownership of American land. And again, a lot of the headlines are focused on China, and there's plenty of good reasons behind that. But I was surprised to find that there's a lot more to the story than just China buying acreage.
Now, are they as in China, are they buying the most land out of foreign entities? Where do they fall in this?
Yeah, so when we're looking this up, the stats as of early 2024, there's roughly 46 million acres that are owned by a foreign country, which equates to 4% of available land that is privately owned for purchase.
So it's not that much, but I mean, America is a massive place. So 4% of that is a lot. That's a ton of land, but
it does show you that 46 million acres is just only 4%. But most of that, the biggest percentage, goes to Canada.
Interesting.
They have millions of acres of forest in Maine, in Michigan, and then the country after that, Netherlands. And as we kept going, so the top, whatever number this is, 8. So it's Netherlands, Italy, United Kingdom, Germany, Portugal, France. Which I was like, that's a lot of European countries buying land.
Countries. I didn't hear China in there.
Yeah, not yet. But also, all of these countries, like the top, whatever number, what am I looking at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 countries. So they're buying either acreage for the forest, for their timber industries, or about 75% of that land is being bought and is tied to solar and wind energy in some way. So some kind of renewable energy source, whether that's for experimentation or what. I just thought that was really interesting that all of these European countries are buying land and trying to do something with renewable energy.
That is interesting. I wonder why it's here. I guess it's just an availability kind of thing. Compared to the United States, they can't hold a candle in size. Except Canada, I guess. But
and again, Canada's buying it for timber.
Right.
Germany, Portugal, France. I don't know. I thought that was, and there's nothing definitive either. Everything that I looked up in terms of purchasing agreements, it's all estimated that this is the reason why, or the proposed intent of use of the land. That's what's written down, but they can't verify that that's the land is being used for, which is also so weird and sketchy. So another country owns this land, and we maybe know what they're doing with it, but maybe we don't. I don't know. I thought it's just weird.
Do we have we as the United States, are there any laws in place to keep track of what's going on?
So the law that I found looking at this was the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act. So they call it AFIDA of 1978. AFIDA.
AFIDA.
is basically it requires any foreign individuals or entities to disclose to the USDA the buying or transferring of US land. So
And
it
that's it,
sounds
right?
good,
Like
right? That's it, yeah.
that's as far as it
But
goes. Just like let us know if you're buying our land. We're not going to
yeah,
probe any deeper.
yeah, I mean, basically, 14 states have some type of law that limits either the amount of land, and in the verbiage, they're called aliens. Aliens can hold in the U.S. or the amount of time that they can hold on to that. And for some states, it's like 6 years. So I don't know, again,
Huh,
why, but
interesting.
yeah, I know, yeah. So, but there's already been cases where, and again, it's the making the news because it's China, but
Hmm.
there was a Chinese corporation in Texas, as an example, that the Texas government found did not disclose the sale of land in Texas.
Oh, okay.
I
And just
know.
for this episode, and just to clarify, when we say like China or another country, it's really like a corporation registered under that country. It's not like the
Yeah.
Chinese government is like we're buying this for the
No,
Chinese
I mean,
Communist Party or something like that.
there's nothing that says it's for the Chinese Communist Party, but you do need to be, I would say, just
Yes, yeah.
cautionary when you're talking about Chinese governments, because there's quite a lot of evidence that shows that like Chinese corporations work for the government. They have to be
Exactly.
like
And
approved by the government and they work for the government. Yeah.
that was the big thing when we saw this case in Texas,
Hmm.
right? That was one of the
Hmm.
reasons it was such a big deal. Like they didn't disclose the land, but the owner was also a Chinese billionaire who
Right. Yep.
had ties to the Chinese government and military officials and stuff like that. And
Yep.
in China, it's not the Chinese government has access to all private industry records and stuff like that,
Yep.
right? It's not like the
Yep.
US where it's private. It's if they want to see something, they're going to go in and see it.
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
And they have a say if it doesn't kind of jive with their government mission, right?
Right, right. It's not, it's not like America where it's like capitalism and industry.
Right.
It's all tied to something.
Correct. Yeah. And
Okay,
that's
sorry.
just like an overview of that's why people when they see anything associated with China, they just immediately assume it's tied to their government.
Hmm.
Initially looking at all of these articles, I was sure that the buying of American farmland was to have a place to produce food outside of the host country. So again, when we talked about Ukraine and parts of the continent of Africa that are affected because Ukraine can't get wheat out, I thought that this was almost like a backstop. So they have countries are buying land in America. That way, if stuff goes bad, they can go, okay,
Right.
I can grow stuff in America and ship it back to my country.
Oh,
That's what I
okay.
thought it was. It's
I can
working
see that.
around, yeah, working around like the fragility of the global food chain. But for all the countries that we've talked about so far, from what we can gather from these reports that are done to AFIDA, like that act that we talked about,
Hmm.
it seems that most were centered around energy or timber, except China. And if
Ah.
you're looking at it, yeah, I know. Too bad they don't have that sound where it's like dun dun dun.
I know, right? Oh, I need that one.
I know. So thinking about China, we kind of switch our thought process to like strategic reasoning, right? What geopolitical influence is China gaining by purchasing land in the United States? China is 18 on that list of who owns land in the US. Not one, not two, 18.
Hmm.
And if you're looking at it, they own roughly 380,000 acres of land. Again, if you're
Yeah, so
thinking like
in the grand
1.6
scheme,
billion acres, right? It's like a
yeah.
0.0% or something like that. But
So there's got to be something more to that then.
yep, where they're buying it and why they're buying it is what people are getting all worked up about. Because there's a lot, okay, let me say, there's a lot of speculation that
Hmm.
the areas that China is buying land are strategically close to very specific US air bases.
Ah,
Um,
so they're buying land that just happens to be very close
mhm,
to U.S. Air Force bases.
yep, and think
What a
places that are
coincidence.
places that are looking into like drone technology, places that are working on like supersonic stuff, like stuff like that, where you're like, oh, that's weird.
Mm, what a strange coincidence.
So one of the cases that's made the news is a company called Fufeng USA. It's a Chinese business. They were looking to invest $1 billion on
Hmm.
facilities for, and I don't know what this is, wet corn mill. They
Oh, that's
wanted
where
to
they
make.
make cream corn.
Nah, is it real? No,
No,
you're
I have
kidding.
no idea.
Like
They're just really
no.
interested in the cream corn industry.
No, I can't even say it again. Right, they're gonna make that facility.
For a wet corn mill.
Anyway,
I know, I have to
so
look up what a wet corn mill is
yeah,
now.
the local community is super pumped because they're gonna get a huge influx of cash. And the place is called Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Oh.
And it looks good, right? But then the Air Force
Oh, okay.
was like no, no way.
Hold
No.
on, time out.
Yep, they were
So
like
just
this.
real quick, this is actually pretty
Oh
interesting,
no.
just in terms of what our podcast is.
Okay.
Corn wet milling is a process of breaking corn kernels into their component parts: corn oil, protein, cornstarch, and fiber.
Huh.
It
Oh,
uses
and what?
water as a series of steps to separate the parts to be used for various products.
Okay, and then
Neat.
does that go into like things like dog food when they say like processed corn or something like
Like
that?
cornmeal and stuff like that. I
Yeah, yeah,
assume so,
yeah.
yeah. I think you get like
Mm.
corn germ meal, condensed fermented corn, gluten meal, and gluten feed. So it goes through all these
Yeah.
different
Oh,
steps
yeah.
within the mill, and then it breaks it into all these different parts to be used for whatever purposes.
Dude,
So
is it going to the pork industry? You were just saying that
probably,
feed? I
honestly,
bet it is. Oh, I bet it is.
the feed probably definitely is. I mean, I would 100% assume that it is. Yeah,
The more we look into it, everything is tied to the pork industry.
it's so connected. It's wild.
Isn't that crazy?
It really is. I mean, we got on a little side tangent there because we were,
Anywho,
you know,
wet
but I think
corning.
it really does just, yeah, I think it really just all kind of ties together and is interesting. The
Mm.
Chinese wanted to come in and build this mill just out of the kindness of their hearts for the people of Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Does
But
that
the Air
make
Force was a bit like, wait a
yeah.
minute, time out.
Does that make any sense that the Chinese would come in and do a wet corn mill now that you looked up what it is? Does that make any sense?
I would say no until you find out how close they were
Hmm.
to that Air Force base.
It's 12 miles away from the Air Force Base. It's the
There you
land
go.
that they bought. But
12 miles, that's nothing.
yeah. Yeah, that's nothing. Yeah, the Air Force was like, this is a matter of national security, and the project was halted. And the Chinese government has laws that allow the government to access information held by its citizens and its corporations, like you were saying. So
Right, okay, okay.
the thought was that even though this is its own corporation, the Chinese
Yeah.
have complete access to anything that they might happen to report on
Right.
or
So
notice or take, put
so
anything in their
anything
reports. Hmm.
Fu Feng USA might see that happens to
Yep.
be like a drone or and this groundbreaking technology, they would send
E-
back
Even like
essentially.
even stuff like Fu Fang does their deliveries at 9 o'clock because the local base is super busy at 8 o'clock. You're establishing a pattern of life for that base, which can be used
Mhm.
against it.
Right,
Which
right, right. Okay.
nobody likes doing that. Yeah, yeah.
Even just anything as casually as just sitting there and
Yep.
observing the base 12 miles away is reason
Hmm.
enough for the United States military to be like, we're going to halt this project. We're uncomfortable with this.
Yeah, yeah. And then the locals were like, "Okay, but that's $1 billion."
We
Like,
really love that mill, so can you build it?
yeah.
So
So
that's kind of a bummer for the locals, but
yeah,
you can understand why it would be shut down. But
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, right? And then that's just an example. There are several examples like that where
Hmm.
a Chinese entity is buying huge swaths of land. So you mentioned the billionaire in Texas. He
Hmm.
was buying land, a ton of acreage
Right.
for a
Yeah. But
wind farm, and it got shut down because locals were like, there's like no wind here ever. Like whatever area that it was in, it's close to like an air base, not anywhere near the standards that you need to have a windmill. There's zero wind like to generate any kind
right,
of energy. So they're like, nice
right.
try.
And I
Nice try.
heard tech, and I remember reading in the articles that it was essentially shut down because Governor,
Abbott?
yes, Governor
Yeah.
Abbott was worried. I mean, Governor Abbott and his his party or his what do you call that?
Cabinet?
Cabinet? I guess I don't know. The his
Party people?
Governor Abbott's party people. What is it? Is it Governor Abbott's administration
Ah.
was worried that they might access Texas's power grid,
Oh
which
yeah,
is,
yeah.
it's independent. If you don't know, it's independent of the United States power grid because
Mm-hmm.
Texas is Texas
Mm-hmm.
and have to do everything their way. But they ended up passing the Lone Star Infrastructure Protection Act, which
Mm-hmm.
basically prevents foreigners from accessing the power grid for concerns just like we were talking about. And it's this whole crazy thing. But that billionaire ended up having, we mentioned earlier, ties to the Chinese military. Like his
Mm-hmm.
company would hire army and government officials. He had a personal relationship with the authorities from I'm probably going to butcher this, with the Xinjiang province. So
Oh
it was
yeah,
like
okay.
he has all these relations that made people a little worried enough to pass this law.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I haven't read the law, but the title of it, I'm like, all right, that makes sense.
I
I don't
did
want
read it, and I'm not going to
to.
bore everybody with it, but yeah, it's essentially it's designed to prevent foreigners from accessing the Texas grid. And this guy's son, Sun Guangshin, his company was, or two companies, Brazos Highland Properties
Yeah,
LP and
Brazos,
Harvest
yeah.
Texas LLC. They bought more than 100,000 acres
Mm-hmm.
in Texas for a wind farm, which, like you said, raised enough suspicion for people like, wait, what are you, a wind farm here?
What wind? I know.
What are you farming, actually?
Where's this wind you speak of?
So it's not so much, like we said,
Yeah.
China's 18th in the amount of farmland purchased for a foreign entity, but it's really like, where are you buying this?
Yeah. It makes me think of, have you ever seen that Parks and Rec video where they're like, don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious. It's like the Chinese,
uh,
like, don't be suspicious.
the next like company names are going to be like America Best Farmlands. Like, all right, cool.
Avocados from Mexico. No, I mean.
Exactly. Oh, wait. Wind from China. Wait, no.
But there's more to the story still. So China, where they're buying the land is, very concerning, like we just talked about. But China is also buying farmland to own farmland, which is different from what we were talking about, those top 6, 7.
Right.
They're buying farmland to have farmland. So another example, there was a video, and this guy has been on social media. He talked to Dr. Phil. He's been,
Mm-hmm.
he's gotten some traction behind his story. His name is John Boyd. He's a farmer and he's the owner of Boyd Farms. And he was talking about what was happening in his town in Virginia. He used to be able to buy an acre of land for roughly $3,000, but the Chinese moved into his area and they started buying up land at a much higher rate, at like $20,000 an acre,
Oh man.
which
Okay.
super inflated,
Yeah.
like artificially, the property taxes. So John Boyd was like, not only can I not buy any more land, the property tax that I'm paying now is way outside of whatever was budgeted in any previous years. So he
Right.
is, right. So it's like hurting his bottom line. And then additionally, Boyd was talking about how when he harvests, I think he said he had soy and corn. When he
Mm-hmm.
harvests that, he ships it to a now Chinese owned factory where it's processed. And
Mm-hmm.
this ownership of these grain logistics, kind of these middle steps from taking it out of the ground to like getting it
Mm-hmm.
to people to eat, all those middle steps, the Chinese ownership is growing, but it's not getting as much attention as the fact that they're owning land. But the metrics behind how much the Chinese are holding stock in our food supply is,
Mm.
it's concerning for sure.
Right. So
Because
even if Americans do own and farm the land, in many scenarios, they're shipping it to be processed at these like wet
Mhm.
corn mills or whatever,
But yeah,
through a Chinese entity.
that's right. Like these grain processing centers, anything to do with these logistics, even the warehouses. Smithfield is more like pork
Mm-hmm.
centered, but still like the processing and the business itself that's shipping it out are Chinese owned. So I
Yeah.
think if we're looking at anything, yeah, where are they buying the land? How are they affecting these property taxes where they're buying land? And then what else are they owning that is actually like vital to our food supply network?
Right.
I know. So yeah, I thought that part was the most interesting where it's like, oh, wait a minute.
And that's stuff that isn't talked about when you first hear Chinese are buying farmland. Yes, they're buying farmland, but what
Yep.
else are they buying? And
Well, I think it's
why?
parallel, right? You got a couple of things. They're buying farmland near Air Force bases, which is sus enough. But then at the same time, they're also buying parts of our system there. So yeah, both at the same time. You're like,
And the
how is
fact that
this
they're coming in and buying farmland for
way over?
$17,000 more
Yeah,
than it should cost your average American farmer. I mean, that
yeah,
I think there are plenty of things a little like that are suspect in this scenario, but that
yeah,
right there kind of makes me angry
yeah.
because
It's
this is
like a
land that,
like a chess
John
game. Yeah,
Boyd or yeah,
yeah, yeah.
an American farmer who's just farming. He does. There's no, he just
Hmm.
wants to grow his farm and create generational wealth or get by or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Hmm.
the Chinese entities are coming in and buying this land for way overpriced, and it's
Yeah.
definitely for other reasons.
Yeah, yeah, like I said, I just think it's like a chess game where we're just now realizing like they're playing and we're on the board, like
Right, right, right. Oh, right, crud. I missed
yeah.
a few turns.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see.
You mentioned Smithfield, and
Yep.
I wanted to bring them up real quick just because if you don't know, Smithfield is one of the largest
Pork producers. Yep.
producers in the United States. They own
Hmm.
tons of acres in North Carolina and that like surrounding area. But and this is where I'm just laughing because I'm thinking of the "Don't Be Suspicious" song.
Yeah.
It's the WH Group, formerly Shuanghe Group,
Hmm.
received
I know.
financial backing from the Chinese government to purchase Smithfield Foods and obtained more than 146,000 acres of U.S. land in the process, which
Which
includes hog farms, processing plants, and the feed
hmm
mills. So it's the whole assembly line, if you will.
that's right.
And
But the Smithfield purchase, think about that, 146,000 acres. In total, they have the Chinese own 370,000. So it's like a third of their land holdings is just with the
mhm,
Smithfield food ownership, which I don't know. From what I understand, the deal was like $7.1 billion.
right,
Isn't that nuts?
that is
Uh,
insane. And they just came in and did it.
the leverage of food and being able to feed their people is now in their hands
Mm,
versus we send you pork, we send you supplies that you need. We now have a diplomatic way to come to the table, right? The bargaining table. They take
and
that away from us because they now own Smithfield themselves. They don't need
right,
the US, they can do it themselves.
and I guess that's kind of it falls into what we talked about in the episode with David Vorman and alternative
Hmm.
proteins,
Yeah.
where China's really heavily investing in alternative proteins, like lab grown meats and stuff like that, because their population is getting wealthier and they can
Hmm.
afford kind of meats. So it would make sense. Whereas before they would have like a largely plant based diet where it's like rice and beans and stuff like that. More and more people are getting wealthy enough to afford meat. And with the
Right.
increased demand, buying 150,000 acres
Yep.
and the whole assembly line from the fields to the pig themselves to the processing and shipping and all of that. I guess it would make sense if they were just shipping it, to the United States, but also sending some
Yeah.
back to China to feed their own people, or just having it there as a fallback or a failsafe.
Yeah. Now they're self sustaining and they're making money
Hmm.
off of it at the same time.
Right. So definitely
And
interesting.
the fact that this happened 11 years ago and we're just like, wait, what? Now?
Right.
you
Right.
know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've owned it for a while, but yeah, I guess so. What really is like the timeline here? They
Um,
started buying. I mean, we know they bought it in 2013. They bought
yeah,
Smithfield.
but
The stuff in Texas didn't happen till that was
2021.
that was recently. Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's just
It
I don't
has
know exactly what the plan is, but
no. I mean, if we did, man,
yeah,
we'd
our
have some
little
legit
podcast, we
jobs.
figured it out. Yeah.
The amount of land that China has been buying has like gone up by like 50% since like 2021. So they have definitely
Mm.
ramped up the buying of land. Man, I wonder if it coincides with the balloon. Remember the like weather balloon,
Oh yeah, the
like
weather balloon thing. I never looked
recon?
more into that,
Yeah,
but
I
I
wonder if
wouldn't be
it
too
ties into
surprised.
that. Yeah.
Probably. Sorry, that was just our pork weather balloon. Didn't mean to end up on your nuclear base. My bad.
We're looking for the best bacon ever.
They're very good at just doing things that seem inconspicuous, and then when you look in a little bit, you're like, wait a minute.
I know. You're like, no,
Wait. Time out.
that's definitely suspicious.
So I did see in one of the articles that we were reading, one of the
Mhm.
studies about this was that some like congressmen and defense members, like members of the military, were a little worried that there was this off chance that they could do something with like the genetic code data in
Oh
U.S.
yeah.
crops.
Yeah, so basically that, right? They're thinking that China could strengthen its agricultural output by stealing the genetic codes of the seeds that the US has been working on.
Right.
Um, which I do think is funny because everything is like non-GMO, but everything is genetically modified, which is why we
Right.
have better crops, right? There, better yields and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know though. That seems like a more of a stretch.
I know, especially when it comes to
Like
Smithfield. It's like try to hack
can't
our American pigs.
can't you like get this big?
Steroids.
Get the wet milk going. That's why. But I
It's
mean, like the seeds don't really make sense to me because couldn't I just order seeds online?
right. Like
Uh,
they would just
eh,
order some of
right?
the genetically modified seeds, and
Yeah.
rather than coming over and buying hundreds of thousands of acres, and then being like,
Yeah,
"Oh yeah,
right?
we need to farm with your seeds," and they're
Like
like, "Okay."
like stop at a Tractor Supply and be like, I'm gonna take these.
It seems like there were if that was the case, they
Yeah.
added a number of unnecessary steps, very expensive steps.
Can I tell you a random history story that this reminds me of?
Sure.
It will absolutely take us off track a little bit. Um, and we can blame the British again. But way back when the British sent in this like 6 foot tall, like white Scottish guy to like try to infiltrate the Chinese tea market. And this dude is as white comes, and he sewed into his head a braid because at the
Oh
time
my goodness.
the Chinese wore like a one, like a braid in their hair.
Hmm, hmm.
And he sewed it into his head and was just like, hey,
Gosh.
walking around like he was Chinese. And everybody was like, what's going on here? But we're gonna be nice.
Hey,
Like,
bud.
and they were nice to him, right? He at this spy wanted to check out like the tea fields, and they're like, all right. They thought he was maybe like an
Ooh.
ambassador, and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll be, and they were nice and like hospitable, even though he didn't speak Chinese and was pretending to be a Chinese person.
Oh my goodness.
And they were like, okay, buddy. And they didn't know it, but they taught him how to like harvest the tea and like what to do to get the best yields. And he stole all these tea seeds and everything else and wrote down everything to do. And he stole it and he left. He's like, ha ha ha. And like, and then the British were
Okay,
able to
bye.
start their own tea industry in like India.
Oh my
So
goodness.
they're like, "Ah, they'll never know. I had no
That's
idea. I
oh my
totally tricked
gosh.
them." That's
What was
what
this
this
guy's
makes me
name?
think of. Oh, I have to look it up.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I had my students read about this for my diplomatic history class, but so funny. He like
Oh my
wrote
gosh.
like he like would write back like they have no idea that I'm not Chinese, and it's like
Day 342. They still
yeah,
don't suspect a thing.
so clever. Yeah.
Wow.
That's what that's
That's
what this makes me think of. Like the Chinese, it's like reverse now. The Chinese are like we're learning from history. We're going
yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah,
going to
yeah, yeah.
America.
We'll go and pretend to be American farmers.
Let's
One
steal their
seed, please.
steal their seeds. One seed, please, and then like runs off like
Yeah. Gets into a helicopter, just
yeah,
takes off.
suckers.
Yeah.
Who knows? All right, yeah. What else we
No, so
got? I think that's it for
that's kind of
today. Huh?
an intro on what's happening, kind of
Yeah.
all over the place. But the main idea here is that a bunch of countries own farmland in the United States. Most of
Yeah.
it is pretty straightforward. They have to report via the
Yep.
AFIDA, whatever you want to call it. And China really just raises concerns because of our history with them, how we view them on a geopolitical level,
Yep.
and like we mentioned, where they're buying the land.
Yep.
It's not very conspicuous that Canada buys a forest in Maine to harvest lumber.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
But for China to buy a corn field 12 miles away from an Air Force base in North Dakota,
Yeah.
little suspect,
Yep.
little suspicious. For them to buy 100,000 acres of land in Texas for a wind farm
Yep.
where there's no wind, also suspicious. So these are things that like members of Congress, members of the military, like the higher ups are they're looking at, and they're kind of keeping abreast of the situation. There's nothing really right now to be alarmed about, I would
No.
say. It's just this is what's happening, and we thought it was fascinating and interesting as we dove into it.
Yeah. And
I don't
just
think there will be 4 episodes on it like
no.
we did, but I do think it's an interesting thing, and it's good to just be aware of.
Yeah, and I think it again shows there are a number of places where our food chains, our food systems are fragile, and this is just another. We're just seeing it on a different level, like right here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And it shows how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
Like as the further we get along in this podcast, the more we can look back and be like, "Oh, this is like in that one episode where we talked about X thing." I can see how that ties in.
Yeah.
And I think as we move along and as we build this podcast, we'll actually most likely have the opportunity to talk to more experts and people who know more than we do, which will be a nice change of pace.
Hey, we know a lot.
We do now.
That's part of it, right? We're just like interested in learning and figuring it out. Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't be here if we talking about this if we didn't find it interesting, right? Like,
yeah.
What a colossal waste of time that would be for the two of us. But I mean, I've learned a lot just in the 12 episodes we've done so far. And I think that's a good segue to potentially our next episode. I don't know, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But we have a really exciting guest who's going to come on and talk more about alternative proteins and the world there. And we're building our connections as a professional podcast interested in global food security. We're trying to reach out and talk to people who have interesting insights. And so if you're listening to this and that sounds like you fit the bill, reach out to us. You can reach out to us on social media. We're at Farms and Frontlines on most social media sites. You can email us at farmsandfrontlines@gmail.com.
And that's why we're going to alternative proteins some more, because you've gotten some interest, or some people wrote to you saying, hey, I'd like to know more about alternative proteins, right?
Yeah. And it just so happened that when we had the episode with David on, he actually knew the gentleman that wrote the article we referred to a lot, who worked for the CSIS, which we'll talk more about on his episode.
Yeah.
So we're super excited about that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that'll be great. That'll be awesome.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll continue to listen.
We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.